Popov. I've been ill for the last couple of days, but really because I admire the ambassador so much, I really felt I had to come to Moscow. As he rightly pointed out, the situation in the region and the world is growing tense. There is a huge information warfare going on at the moment. The mainstream media, for example, in the United States is basically controlled by 6 corporations. The only alternative voices really can be seen in social media networks, which is sort of like a double-edged sword, because extremists also often, I think, with the active support of major powers, are also active on social media networks. But while alternative news is provided through these means, I think we have to be careful, because the United States is gradually reining in outlets like YouTube and Facebook. And this is something that non-Western countries and powers have to think about. What would be, if the plug is pulled, then how do they respond to that? A major problem, and I think my very good colleague from RT pointed out correctly, that we need a center of sorts to counter what is nowadays called as fake news or this information warfare. We get our information mostly from the West. In Iran, our media outlets gain a great deal of their information about Russia from the West, from Western think tanks, from Western media. I've noticed the same is true in Russia, the same is true in China. So our understandings have to become more direct. We have to find our own networks so that we can create greater recognition, objective recognition, and recognition without Western mediums creating distortion in between. We do see, of course, and one issue that has to be dealt with is the rise of extremism again today. This is not new. We saw it in Afghanistan, where there was this unholy alliance between major powers such as the United States and oil-rich Wahhabi-promoting countries helped this extremism grow. Pakistan and Afghanistan today are suffering the consequences because of those policies, but today it's grown even worse. So these so-called Islamists, because I don't believe they represent Islam, and I'm sure no one else here does, they manifest themselves today mostly as Salafism, but in my opinion, perhaps Wahhabism is a very key term. It's, of course, but the point that I want to make here is that extremism manifests itself in many ways, not just in one religion. We see extremism in Christianity, such as Zionist Christians. We see it in Judaism, among Zionists. In fact, in the United States, one of my very close Jewish friends, Hillary Mann Leverett, who used to work in the White House, she has lost her job at the American University despite her past because of, as a Jew, which is critical of Zionism. So there are many heroes out there in all religions that counter extremism, but they are under a great deal of pressure from the powers that exist that use this extremism for their own benefit. Hindu extremism, and so on and so forth, secularism. But I think the 2 forms of extremism that I would like to focus on, one is Euro-centrism, and the other is American exceptionalism. Because today, what we are seeing in much of the world, in Latin America, in Africa, and Asia, but in particular today, in what is often called the Middle East, I would rather call West Asia and North Africa, is how Eurocentrism and American exceptionalism leads to the imposition of humiliation, despotism, apartheid, and war on this region. And this, of course, when the infrastructures of societies are destroyed as such, as a result, and when people are desperate, obviously extremism is something that becomes a source of attraction for those who've been disenfranchised. And of course, the irony is that Western countries are paying the price. We see the backlash such as 9/11, and more recently the huge mass immigration to Europe as a result of their own policies. When you destroy countries like Libya and Syria, then you pay the price. And especially as the world economic situation deteriorates, you see people in Europe becoming more angry, the rise of nationalism, and the clash between these peoples becomes more intense and dangerous. The Russian foreign minister rightly pointed out that we are facing a clash of a crash or collapse of international law, and I think again that goes back to US exceptionalism and US extremism, because they are ignoring the very same laws that they have created and an international order which benefits them more than anyone else. They can, nowadays, especially after Afghanistan and Iraq, the United States has become more and more intolerant towards the same biased laws that benefit them more than anyone else. Nowadays, we see what happened, of course, in Syria, Libya, and Yemen. The irony is that today, mass starvation is being imposed on the people of Yemen with the support of the United States. This is extraordinary. This is something unprecedented in contemporary human history. Yet there is silence from the mainstream media. In Syria, despite the enormous shortcomings of the Syrian government, but the fact is that the battle today is between tolerance among religions or different ideas in Syria which existed before and continue to exist today, and the intolerance of the extremism that is being supported by the United States and by dictatorial regimes like Saudi Arabia and other oil-rich countries. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and it's not just ISIS, it's Al-Qaeda, Jaish al-Islam, Ahrar al-Sham, of course they keep changing their names, but it is all these groups together that are a threat to all of us. And the real heroes in Syria are actually the Sunni population which has resisted the extremism. The Christians, the Alawites, the Druze, the Sufis, the secular elements of the population have all resisted this extremism, but I think that the very fact that Sunni Islam has resisted so heroically in Syria is itself a sign that these groups cannot ultimately achieve what they wish to achieve. I believe that Russia, Iran, and China, among other countries, have to pay special attention to Central Asia. What happened in Syria, those forces that brought about the catastrophe in Syria and other countries will, if permitted, in order to undermine these countries, they will use Central Asia as the next battlefront. So these countries must work together. Moderate groups and ideologies must be strengthened. Egypt, for example, in our part of the world, has to go back to its central role as a promoter of moderate Islam. And countries like Saudi Arabia should be marginalized. And finally, I'd like to point out that more than anything else in our region, we see an alliance of extremism. The apartheid state in Palestine, the Israeli regime, is supporting Al-Qaeda on its borders. It is bombing Syrian government positions, just like this morning, apparently again, in order to help the extremists. Unfortunately, the Turkish president is playing a destructive role, contrary to the wishes, I think, or to the general beliefs of a very tolerant nation in Turkey. And of course, there's countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And it's, I think, those countries which are interested in Saudi and Qatari wealth, which is decreasing, should be aware that it is also a very double-edged sword. The more influence that Saudi Arabia and Qatar have anywhere across, in the world, the more signs of extremism. Again, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me, and I've enjoyed hearing my colleagues this morning, and I hope to benefit this afternoon. Thank you.
Спасибо.